Hello and welcome. My name is Michael Johnson with the Absolute Sound, and today we're going to be looking at one of the most visually striking turntables on the market today, the Michell Gyro SE. So let's jump in. The Michell Gyro SE is a turntable that Michell has been steadily working on and improving since it was first introduced in the 1980s. It is a classic British suspended design, and what this means is that the turntable is not a fixed mass turntable, but rather it is separated from the base platform it sits on and separated from the motor by a series of 3 springs on the platform, like so. This is also a skeletal design turntable, and it has a number of features that you will notice make for a quite striking design that is visually different than a lot of turntables on the market. Before we get into all the details, I just wanted to give a basic overview of the pricing on this table. Currently, as of 2024, this turntable without arms sells for around $5,500 US. Michell do offer a number of Tonearms that you can purchase with this table, a number of Tonearms that Michell make themselves. This particular turntable that they sent me comes with the TA8 Tonearm. This is a heavily modified version of the Riga Tonearm, the RB330. However, Michell have done a number of upgrades on it, including a different counterweight, a complete rewiring of the internals of the Tonearm, and a few other tweaks I'm sure in there somewhere. This version of the Gyro SE with the Tonearm and with a few of the accessories such as the clamp and the dust cover comes out to $6,500 US. As I stated before, the suspended design turntable is suspended by 3 main springs that are user adjustable to get the right amount of height clearance and balance for your particular room and particular table. The skeletal design of this table is intentional by the designers. They state that this is to limit the amount of resonances that come from a more traditional platform of a turntable. This design also isolates the motor from the rest of the turntable body. The motor is, of course, a DC motor that has 2 separate notches on its pulley for 33 and 45 RPM operation. The chassis is made of aluminum, but it does contain select stainless steel weights on some parts of the table. And the reason why they have these stainless steel weights on the underside of the aluminum chassis, Michell says, is to counterbalance the weight of the Tonearm board to make it so that there is not too much mass on one side of the table. One of the most striking visual elements of the Michell Gyro turntable that you'll see right here are the 6 solid brass weights that sit under the Delrin platter. Delrin is of course one of the most common turntable platter materials. It's used on far more high-end turntables, and it is one of my platter materials of choice. I think it does produce some of the more convincing sounds from a turntable. However, you know, Delrin is expensive to machine, and having a giant Delrin platter can induce its own problems. So Michell have opted to use a thinner Delrin platter and stick with these brass weights on the bottom. These brass weights have a few different benefits, one of which is, of course, the flywheel effect. By having the brass on the outside, the rim of the platter, you get a more stable flywheel effect from the belt drive design. Also, you are lowering the center of gravity of the platter. So there's really 2 benefits in that, and you're also loading mass, essentially. One of the hallmarks of these Michell turntables is their use of a proprietary inverted oil bearing, and this is a bearing which actually is able to easily draw oil up from its base, from the reserve, because the bearing is inverted. This provides a platform of minimal friction and ease of care and longevity. If there is some type of debris or something shedding off the bearing, or dirty oil or something like that, it actually goes down into the reservoir and does not stay on the bearing itself, which does make it a more longer lasting bearing design. So as you can tell already, this is not the simplest turntable design, but it was actually fairly straightforward to set up, especially with the handy manual that Michell included that provides a lot of visual references, including how to unbox the turntable, how to set it up, how to get the suspension tuned just right. The only really difficult thing I encountered was the turntable leads are directly connected, or are not removable, directly connected to the Tonearm itself in the true Riga fashion. And Michell do have you clip those Tonearm leads into a little socket at the base of the table, and I say that is probably the most difficult part about assembling this turntable. Otherwise, it was not that difficult, and of course, if you buy one of their tables with one of their proprietary Tonearms. Michell will ship it with the Tonearm already installed. Before I got into my listening test with the Michell Gyro, I wanted to run a few speed stability tests with my RPM app on my phone, and the results were pretty consistent and pretty good. It did tend to run slightly fast. The average speed I was measuring was about, instead of 33 1/3, I was getting about 33 1/2, 33.58 was the average measurement I was getting with a deviation of plus 0.74%. So not terrible measurements for a belt drive turntable, but it did tend to run just slightly fast. The wow and flutter measurement hovered somewhere between 0.2% and 0.22%. So it does have a little bit of wow and flutter, which is not unusual for a belt drive turntable that is run directly by a DC motor. Now, for the retail price of about $1,000, Michell do sell a power supply unit, the HRPSU, that can be attached to this table. It can be an upgrade to this table. And I tend to think that for any belt drive design, you really do want a separate regulating power supply. And other reviewers have measured this turntable with that HRPSU and other users, and from all the results I've read from them, they are able to greatly reduce that wow and flutter number, keeping it closer to 0.07% sometimes. While the slightly fast speed of the table does seem to be somewhat of a constant, but they're able to really get that wow and flutter number down with the Michell PSU. And so if you are interested in this table, if I was going to buy this table, I would definitely want the PSU with it. That's something I would strongly consider. The Michell Gyro turntable was actually the first turntable I ever spent kind of long-term hands-on time with that was a suspended design. And I'd heard a lot about suspended designs over the years, and I've heard some examples in showrooms and at hi-fi shows. Of course, the Lin LP12 is, a famous example of a suspended design. There are various others over the years. Many of the Torrens tables are suspended design turntables. And it definitely has its devotees. As with kind of everything in audio, there are always pluses and minuses to each design choice. One of the benefits of a suspended design table that is very impervious to the vibrations of the room, feedback from your speakers, from subwoofers. I run a subwoofer in this room. I live in an apartment. We have wood, sprung floors. Lots of things like that. A suspended design turntable can mitigate a lot of those factors, but it does introduce a lot of other factors that you have to contend with. One of which is that when you have a sprung design like so, what you're doing is this design is sprung, it's isolated, but if this is ever moving to isolate for some reason, it does slightly change the tension of the rubber belt to the motor. And so you're introducing another factor there that could bleed in some type of distortion or some type of eccentricity into the sound of your table. So there are pluses and minuses. Does that mean one type is better than the other? No, it's all about how it's implemented and what the ending result is. Suspended design tables seem to have this impression of them that they are warm, romantic tables. And all the pluses you get with that type of association, you also get the minuses where you think of these tables as, you think they're going to be muddy or smeared or lugubrious, one of the many words of doom in this hobby. I was pleasantly surprised then when I discovered after, breaking in this turntable that there's a lot of things that are familiar about this turntable to my listening experience with other belt drive tables in similar price brackets. Now, the cartridge that was shipped to me to start my review of this turntable was the Goldring Elite moving coil cartridge. And this is a cartridge that retails for around $1,100. And so it's somewhat well matched to the type of cartridge that many people are going to be considering with a table at this price point in the $5,000 to $6,000 range. However, I immediately encountered one of the downsides of Michell's choice of arm, especially here with the T8, and that is because this is an RB330 based arm, Riga famously forego a lot of adjustability in their tone arms for, I guess, for simplicity's sake, for the purity of design. I'm not really sure what their intentions are, but famously the RB330 does not have easy VTA and azimuth adjustment. Now, Michell do sell an adapter to go with this Tonearm that allows you to adjust the height of the VTA, but that was not included in my review sample. So I was kind of stuck at the whatever the VTA is naturally of this Tonearm sitting on this arm board. And for the Goldring Elite cartridge that they shipped me, which I thought was a good match for this table, it did have a nice sound to it. Unfortunately, the cartridge was a little too low for the height the Tonearm was set at, and so I ended up with a VTA and a stylus rake angle that was far too obtuse. If you think about you know, your stylus coming down here and the record being here, you want about 92 degrees usually, about something like that. And you can set this visually with your naked eye, or set it with a what's better even is a USB microscope, which is what I used. But I was finding my stylus rake angle was so obtuse that we were easily over 100, somewhere in here, and that was leading to a little too much brightness for my liking, and a little bit of sibilance too on some higher pitch things, especially in the inner groove. And you know, I set both cartridges I used for this review, I set up with first Michel's own protractor that comes with the Tonearm here, which is okay. It's not very in-depth, and I think for a turntable sitting around the $6,000 mark, I think you probably want something a little more in-depth. So then I went to my trusted Fikert alignment system. You know, this guy right here. And this, I was able to set up both the Goldring cartridge and my Hana Umami Red to the bare-walled alignment here using this protractor. And that yielded much better results. But I was still not happy with not being able to dial in VTA on the Goldring. Then I moved to my Hana Umami Red, which fortunately is a slightly taller cartridge than the Goldring. And because of that, even though I wasn't able to adjust VTA, naturally, the way this Tonearm is set up, I was able to get a lot closer to 92 degrees on that cartridge than I was with the Goldring. And so for the rest of the review, I stuck with the Hana Umami Red, which is a cartridge I know pretty well at this point. I've used it in a few turntable reviews. Now, I do know, based on my research, that the next up, the step up Tonearm that Michell sells with these tables, which is, I believe, the Technoarm, that does have adjustable VTA in it. So if you are, you know, someone that cares a lot about your cartridge setup, like I do, that may be a Tonearm you want to consider with this. Or Michell are happy to make arm boards for various other Tonearms, and so you do have some choices. But I just wanted to make you aware that somewhat of the default Tonearm that comes with this table is not exactly as adjustable as myself or some of you may prefer. Once I got over these minor setup hurdles, my listening impressions of the Michell Gyro SE are of a turntable that's not at all what I expected. I expected, you know, a turntable that would be overly lush, that would be every connotation I had in my head of a suspended turntable design. But this is actually a fairly neutral sounding turntable. If it had to lean in one direction, I would say it does lean towards the more the open mid-range and more of the you know, juicy coloration, but not coloration in a way that distorts, but coloration in a way, I would say, that expands the tone of instruments. So let's go into some musical examples. One of the first records I took notes on was this Mobile Fidelity pressing of the Grateful Dead's 1970 classic album, Working Man's Dead. You know, this is one of the few Mobile Fidelity records from the 2010s that is actually cut all analog directly from the original tapes, not using a DSD step. And it's a fantastic sounding pressing, and it sounded wonderful on the Michell Gyro. I was able to hear vocals so cleanly, all the different vocal layerings, especially in the opening track, Uncle John's Band, where you have Weir, Garcia, and Lesch's vocal harmonies all overlapping and layering. All the voices sounded very distinct, very warm, very full-bodied. The acoustic guitar had surprisingly sharp transient response. Like again, I had my preconceptions about a suspended turntable design, but transients here were sharp, were clear. Everything had a nice neutrality to it. If anything was lush, it was in how full-bodied everything sounded, especially in the mid-range. But nothing was overly warm or drawn out or overly gooey or romantic. The acoustic guitar sound was very open sounding, very rich but very open. The plucks with the picks on the strings sounded fantastic. In high time, Jerry Garcia's steel guitar was very open. It had a bite to it, and it would really sing out into these interweaving lines in the texture. Like sometimes the steel guitar would bend in and out of the vocal lines. Sounded absolutely fantastic. Later on in the album, the track Easy Wind, the drums on this track have a very interesting stereo, like studio panning that is not something I really noticed before. It comes out very well. The Michell Gyro portrays this very clearly. All the little studio tricks come out on here. And of course, here we get Pigpen's kind of Jim Morrison-esque vocal style that sounded very meaty, very fleshed out, very full on the Gyro SE. I wanted to see how aggressive and forward the Michell Gyro SE could be, so I put on a kind of a biting punk record from the 1980s. This is The Birthday Party's debut self-titled album. This is classic post-punk new wave featuring the vocals of a very young Nick Cave. And this is a very glassy record, a very jarring record. One that is biting, has a lot of punch to it, has a lot of high-pitched, jangly guitar sounds, screeches. Nick Cave is young and energetic here. He's wailing all over the place. And this is a lot of fun. But if you play this and it sounds too soft or too rolled off, all the energy is sucked out of the recording. And that wasn't the case here. The Michell really had sharp transients on this. A lot of nice, especially that mid-bass punch that this record has. It's portrayed very cleanly on here. I was impressed by pretty much everything in the frequency spectrum. This recording doesn't have super low bass, but I think this table in general doesn't have crazy plumb the depths low bass, but I don't think a lot of tables at this price point do. If you want crazy low plunge the depths deep bass, you do have to kind of step up a couple price brackets. And so I think this turntable is very much in line with its competitors, its price competitors, and its peers in that regard. But if you want to talk about the great normal bass that one would expect from a turntable in this price range, you could put on a recording like this one from Gentle Giant, Octopus. This is a third or fourth UK pressing I have on the Vertigo Spaceship label, because as we all know, or some of us know, original Vertigo pressings of this album are very, very expensive. But for not too much money, you can get one of these third or fourth pressings on the Vertigo Spaceship label that sound excellent. Drums on this pressing are very, very powerful. I was really impressed by how juicy and dynamic and thrilling the kick drum was on the Advent of Panurge. Very satisfying drum sound in general. Keyboards on Raconteur Troubadour sounded beautiful, lush, very expansive, cut through the texture very nicely. There's some tracks on here that have a lot of vocal layering, like Knots. It was crystal clear here, lots of nice throaty texture, and excellent clarity of diction. Even when I was playing this on the more modest Goldring cartridges, dynamics were very, very good. Very explosive. When the drums and the piano kick in on this record, I mean, you really feel it. It's like you're turning up the acceleration quite a bit. And this pressing and this recording in general have a lot of energy. And I think that comes across very well through the Michell Gyro. And even when everything is playing, super loud and the guitar is really wailing, you can still kind of hear everything in the soundstage, and the imaging is still very clear and very good. And I think a big part of that is the suspended design here, because you're not getting any feedback. You can crank your amplifier with this turntable and not have to worry so much about feedback into the platform the turntable is sitting on. And so if you like playing loud rock music, this might be a good thing to look for in your turntables. In fact, a lot of the times when I was playing this table, I could even go up and have the volume all the way up on a quiet chamber music passage and really wrap the bass of my platform and not hear anything through the speakers. And I think that's a testament to just how considered this design is. Moving to some orchestral music, I played a very vintage stereo orchestra recording. This is Sir Thomas Beecham's Lollipops with the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra. And this is an original pressing. This is a beautiful white and gold His Master's Voice pressing from about 1959. This is an interesting recording. Thomas Beecham was a very eccentric figure in mid-20th century conducting, especially in the UK. And you know, he had some of his favorite showpieces he would program on lots of concerts, and they made their way into this album, which is his Lollipops, his favorite orchestral showpieces. And there's some wonderful repertoire in here. I was listening to Saint-Saëns' The Spinning Wheel of Umphal, and this turntable is able to provide an incredibly sweet string tone in a very brilliant and colorful woodwind sound. And again, I was impressed by the dynamic range this turntable had to offer. You were able to go from sound that is very intimate to sound that is very expansive. Now, I would not say this turntable's speciality is super crazy wide soundstage, but it does image very well, and the stage that's there is very coherent. It never loses its image focus. It just might not provide the incredibly wide depth of field that you might get from a turntable that costs twice as much. That's something I've kind of learned in my turntable journey, that you know, one of the things you're really getting when you really go up those price brackets is a crazy wide and deep soundstage. And the soundstage here is very accurate, but it's not a super table. It doesn't compete with those types of presentations. But you compare it to other tables from, you know, the likes of Riga or the likes of VPI in this price range, and it's as good, if not better, than those other tables' soundstage presentation that I've heard. But one of the huge benefits of this turntable, and what I was hearing in both the Goldring and the Hana Umami Red when I was listening on this table, is a very rich mid-range. If you love to swim in your mid-range, this is the table for you. Everything is so open in that frequency band of the mid-range, and it provides super rich string textures, rich woodwind textures. And then because of the dynamic coherence of this table, when the orchestra swells with those big crescendos, it's all very coherent and satisfying. And that soundstage, that imaging, still remains in focus, which is a nice benefit. This recording on here is one of my favorite recordings of Debussy's Prelude to the Afternoon of a Faun. And the flute playing on here by the Royal Philharmonic flautist is astonishing, and it's captured so well and portrayed so well when I was listening on the Michell Gyro SE. There's this effervescent airiness to the flute sound when you're listening to the solo on this, and it has all the overtones and all the different color that you want in all those textures in what is probably one of the biggest flute pieces out there. It has that spin and that airy quality that makes it sound like a convincing rendering of the instrument in front of you, which is, you know, a basic test of any piece of audio equipment is, can it render the colors of these instruments accurately? And the Michell passed the test. And when you get to some more bombastic showpieces, some more extravagant showpieces, some would say more corny showpieces, you get to something like the Chabrier, the March, the Joyous March. And there's big percussive and double bass dynamic explosions at the beginning on this recording, and it gets that hall reverberation in there. And some turntables, when you get that hall reverberation recorded naturally and you mix it with big thunderous dynamics, it sounds a little confused. I remember playing this recording on my old Riga years ago, and it did tend to sound a little confused. Now, that was on a $1,500 turntable, so that's a different story. But, you know, stepping up to something like this Michell at its price point, at its natural price point, you do get that coherence. You get that clarity and stability in these bigger sections, especially when you don't have interference from having your speakers or your subwoofer, you know, sharing walls with your equipment or sharing, you know, floor resonances with your equipment. That's not there with this table. One of the last recordings I went to for this review is a more intimate recording, a jazz recording, and that is the brand new record produced by our own, the Absolute Sound's own Michael Fremer, and that's Rufus Reed presents Kalen Cardello. This is a fantastic intimate record between two jazz musicians, the veteran Rufus Reed and the newcomer Kalen Cardello. And from what I understand, I believe it's actually the first time they were playing together was on this recording. This is a live recording recorded directly from the board in high-res digital at 9624, mastered by Bob Ludwig, who Michael was able to drag out of retirement, and cut by Matthew Luthans at the Mastering Lab in Salina, Kansas. I said before, this is a very intimate sounding recording. You know, it's two musicians communicating, apparently for the first time, but communicating their musical intentions on stage while they're playing these tunes, some of which are Rufus Reed's own tunes, like It's the Nights I Like. I noticed on this recording, especially played through this table, Kalen Cardello's piano has a sparkle to it. It has that high ring that so often is missing in so many recordings of piano where you get an overly muffled or an overly round piano transient. That's not here. The hammer strike, the high transients are all there in spades here on this recording, and the Michell brings that out. I was afraid of this table being too round, especially in the upper register, but it's not. When that information is there on the record, this table portrays it beautifully. On the track Bolivia, Rufus Reed's bass sounds really full and really lush. It has a nice body to it. You're not just hearing the strings, but rather you're hearing the resonance of the wood of the instrument. And that's what you want to hear when you hear bass in an intimate setting, upright bass in an intimate setting. You don't just want to hear the tone of the string. You can go in a dry studio and capture that easily. But when you want to hear acoustic instruments, you want to hear the resonance of the body of the wooden instrument. And that's what you're getting on this combo. Another thing that this recording is able to show off and able to showcase in the equipment that you're pairing it with is the dynamic contrast. There's a lot of micro dynamics and macro dynamics on this recording. There's a spot in The Nights I Like, Rufus Reed's own composition, where Rufus takes over the main melody and Kalen Cardello really drops away. I mean, he goes down significantly to the point where I didn't know on a recording like this, it was able to be clear and still be captured, but it captured very well. I had actually thought that I mistakenly turned the volume down, but no, he was just playing at such a low, subtle dynamic accompanying Rufus Reed. And when they both were able to come back in their harmony sections, it sounded so full and so big. The dynamics on this record were really able to come through this turntable. I really enjoyed my time with the Michell Gyro SE. It helped me to dispel a lot of the previous notions I had about suspended turntable designs, as well as let me appreciate some of the benefits of that design. I don't think still necessarily that this design is any better than the other comparable turntable designs out there, from a mass-loaded design to a light mass coupled design. This is just one way to attack the various problems of turntable design. But Michell's implementation of this technology is very well, and they produced a very, very coherent turntable here. Are there some downsides? Well, yes, I talked about the issue with the Tonearm that included in this table, which isn't very adjustable. I would opt for a different Tonearm with this, or if you are really stuck at this price point, I would get Michell's VTA adjustment attachment that they do sell. But I think at a $6,500 turntable, I think there's no excuse to not be able to adjust VTA easily, because you're going to be pairing a cartridge with a pretty detailed stylus profile. We're not going to be using the Audio-Technica AT95E on a turntable like this. I mean, you can, by all means. It's a great cartridge, but it's not typically the type of cartridge that one's going to be pairing with a table like this. And so having that adjustment capability is very important. I also think, as with any belt drive design, you really do need a power supply unit, and this does not come standard on this turntable. You have to pay another $1,000 to have the PSU that goes with this, and I would not have this. I enjoyed this table as it is, but I would definitely want a lot more speed stability and less wow and flutter out of a belt drive design if I were going to go with a belt drive design. So I would want the PSU with this, and that adds another $1,000 onto it. All that said, those are setup quibbles. Those are accessory quibbles with what is essentially a great turntable design. Michell have really nailed the suspended design here. It works exactly as intended. The weighting system brings its intended results. The sound on this table is very clear, but it still has all the benefits of a suspended design table with that really rich open mid-range that just lets instruments sing, you really hear the tonal lines, the melodic lines, and the weave of instruments on this table. The interplay between instruments is all so smooth and musical and convincing with this turntable. There's so much to like here. The Michell Gyro SE is definitely worth an audition because you need to hear what a suspended turntable design like this can do. It's one of the best examples out there on the market, and certainly one of the most affordable options out there on the market for a suspended turntable design. And if you're willing to play with some of the accessory options, which I think you should, because I think the core turntable that we have here is that good, I think you have a real contender for a high-end turntable on your hands. But those are just my thoughts. I hope you appreciated this review of the Michell Gyro SE turntable. If you did, please remember to hit those like and subscribe buttons to see more Absolute Sound reviews in your feed, and leave your comments down below with your feedback, experiences, and observations. Thank you for watching, and until next time.